Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday of the month, except for the first Sunday of the month. I do Subscriber Sunday, where subscribers send in photos of things in their yard that they're interested in showing off. The email address for sending in photos for that is right here. Make sure the email says something like subscriber photos or something so I know what it is. And also, I have so many. I mean, it's grown every month, and I appreciate everybody's participation. It takes me a long time to put this video together. The ones that I get from today to the end of the month, I may push into next month's, just because there's a lot of photos. Again, thanks for your participation in it. What else do I have going on this week? The May garden to-do video will be up, I guess, hopefully Tuesday. I'll have that up. The Wednesday update video, there should be a lot of progress here. I put up that container planting video yesterday, and yeah, I think two days ago. And a lot of you have watched that video, and I'm going to be running drip irrigation out here. That project will be happening in the next week or two. I've planted more in the vegetable garden, so lots has gone on. So the Wednesday update video should be good as well. So let's get to some questions that I got from last week's video. If you have gardening questions, you can ask them down below. Like I say, I'll be skipping a week because next week's Subscriber Sunday, and that second Sunday of May, we'll be back to question and answer. Okay, somebody asked me if I fertilize large trees. I think they had like a 60-foot tall magnolia or something they were talking about fertilizing. I do. I fertilize everything in the yard, but I tend to just put a coat of organic fertilizer on the ground and ignore the suggestion on the bag for how much to be using. I don't want to over fertilize things. For me, I laid a layer of compost down in this yard, which gets incorporated every time I plant the plant. It's mulched, and I use one application of organic fertilizer early in the spring, and that's about it. And I water things when they're dry, and I get good results from that by not overdoing and overthinking and that kind of thing. So yes, I fertilize everything. I fertilize them all at the same time. I use an organic fertilizer, and that'll be part of an answer of a couple other questions I get here. But I do it lightly, and probably less than what recommended on the bag. I find that pushing things really aggressively leads to a lot of insect problems. Somebody asked me about pruning. They've got some barberries and some fire-powered andinas and wanted to know if they could prune them hard. Most shrubs, if they're well established, and they said these were well established, you can go after pretty hard. Fire-powered andina can really be cut to the ground, and I've done that before because just taking cuttings on them, for doing propagation at the nursery, you can cut them basically to the ground, and they'll come back up from the sucker from the ground. That's not the way I would approach it probably for you, but that's the extreme that you can go to. Barberry, same thing. They'll just come right back up from the ground level. It'd be time to do both of those if you wanted to prune them hard. Somebody asked me about preparing the soil to plant sky pencil hollies. Again, that goes back to that first question where I said how simple I go about this. There's no preparation. I'm mixing some compost or some pine bark soil conditioner in with my existing soil. I'm leaving things mounded up a little bit. That's something else I would add to, my super simple approach. And then I'm mulching them, but I'm not mulching them too deep, and I'm not mulching up onto the plant itself. That's all I do. And then walk away. Keep in mind though, I find that upright, narrow things can be water. They seem to have a problem. They're more drought sensitive. Okay, let's call it that. I see sky pencil hollies, emerald arborvitae, DeGroote's arborvitae. I find that some of those tall, skinny things seem to have some issue with putting water up in the plant easily. Sky pencil hollies were the only plant that I kept pot to pot all summer long at my nursery, and we just could really flood irrigate them. It's kind of weird how much water those things can actually use. So keep that in mind. I'm not saying flood them. I'm just saying that make sure you're not letting them dry out. Other than that, just really super basic, and walk away from them and don't pay attention to them other than making sure they're watered. Okay, somebody asked me about narrow plants in zone 6. And the sky pencil hollies we just talked about are definitely a good choice for you if you only have an 18-inch wide space that you need to get some height in. Of course, you can use Hicks yew as well. That's another upright, narrow shrub as well. And then, the other thing I talked about last week about wandering around and you know, if you see some other narrow things that other people are growing that are doing well, you know, that's another good way to go about finding things that, you know, fit the spaces that you need. You know, going on to walking around college campuses and places like that where they use a lot of different plant material across the space, and they've got a lot of interesting nooks and crannies that they have to find plants for. Maybe an option as well, but certainly Hicks yew and sky pencil hollies would be a good choice. Somebody asked me about, I got a lot of questions about late frost damage. This is the time of year where, you know, things have gotten ahead of themselves, and you know, they get knocked back pretty hard by late frost and freezes. You know, most of all that stuff is just going to leaf right back out. It's not going to matter at all. And let it leaf completely back out before you're making pruning decisions. It may be that the tips of the branches have been killed back, but let that be, you know, let it leaf completely back out, and then if you've got dead tips on the branches and that kind of thing, then go in and clean them up and cut them back. But just wait till it fully leaves out. This also goes to that organic fertilizer thing, because if you use an organic fertilizer in the late winter or early spring, if the ground temperature is cold, that fertilizer doesn't work. And so the fertilizer won't push your plants. If you use synthetic fertilizers, which are fine, but if you use them early in the spring, they can artificially push your plants even if the soil temperature is still a little bit cold. And so setting you up for more frost and freeze damage. So keep that in mind. That's another, probably the main reason I use organic fertilizers. They only work when the soil temperature is warm, which probably means the air temperature is warm, and we've passed the point where frost and freezes are going to have a huge impact. Okay, somebody asked me about dandelions and calcium. You'll see dandelions growing in places where you have compact soil. They have really deep tap roots. You know, if you ever try to pull dandelions, you know, you have to go in and get that tap root out. And they do they do make calcium available for other plants. And the way they go about that is they go deeper down into the soil. So most plants are rooting in the top 2 or 3 inches of soil, and there may not be a lot of available calcium in that layer, but that dandelion's able to go down further. And so in its life cycle, it ends up making calcium available for other plants. Eating them is, you know, eating the greens from dandelions is also high in calcium. Somebody asked me about hard pruning old azaleas. So same question as the barberries and firepower. Yes, absolutely. If you've got old established azaleas after they bloom, you prune azaleas after they bloom, you have a brief window between the end of the time an azalea blooms, old-fashioned azaleas, and sometime in the middle of summer where you can really go after them very hard. And I've taken azaleas 2/3 back, and they have no problem coming back out from that. If you take them back that hard and they're so thin at the bottom, it may take more than one season for them to look great again. Okay. Somebody asked me about, they've got azaleas with very large leaves that grow more aggressively, probably Formosa azaleas, or Gigi Gerbing, George Tabor. There's a bunch of larger, aggressive growing azaleas, and wanted to know which ones would stay smaller. I have a video on my channel about the dwarf encore azaleas, and all the dwarf encore azaleas. I think there's 31, about to be 33 encore azaleas, and I think 16 of them or something in that video. But look up that video, the 16 dwarf encore azaleas, and any of those are going to have smaller foliage and stay more compact. Let's see. Somebody commented about they feel weird about taking photos at people's houses. And because I always talk about, you know, going around your own community and seeing what's doing well. I had, just last week, I was taking a photo of the front of somebody's house. I mean, full on front of their house, because it had a historic marker and it's a beautiful landscape. And they literally walked up. They were walking their dog down the street, and I was like, beautiful landscape. And immediately we struck up a conversation and had no problem. So as long as you get to gardening, start talking about gardening real quick. If you're taking pictures of somebody's place and somebody says something. I was taking pictures. I had walked a little bit into a front yard to take some photos of Acaria a week or two ago, and the lady across the street says, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I was like, "Oh yeah, it's just me taking photos," because I do it all the time. People don't mind you taking photos of their plants as long as you're, you know, tell them that's what you're doing if you see them, obviously. You know, I stop by people's houses and ask them if I can tour their yards for videos for this channel. When you start talking about gardening, everybody takes a deep breath. They're no longer, you know, you know, their politics and all their other things just disappear, and it's just gardening. So they won't mind. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked me about the flowers on this Golden Falls red bud, which I haven't planted yet because it needs to root into this pot. This is his first year. I didn't get any flowers on it this first year. It is leafing out. It's going to look great, but it's not. I mean, they dug that thing out of the ground, and it was probably just grafted, you know, last year. So next year I'll get quite a few flowers on it, but this year I didn't get any flowers on it. Let's see, what's next? Somebody asked me about not getting flowers on their gardenias in a container, but the plants look really good. Be careful not to over-fertilize and over-push green growth on gardenias. I find that if they're a little bit lean, and you know, still again with the organic fertilizer, and you know, pushing them slowly. Sometimes when you push plants too hard, you get lots of green growth and don't get a lot of the fruit or flowers that you're trying to get. That may be an issue on your gardenia if it's not blooming in a container. Let's see. Somebody asked me about planting, though they had planted azaleas in a mixture of manure and compost, and of course they're definitely going to decline in that type of mix. You can use you've seen me use compost. I'm using compost here, but I don't use manure. Manure tends to be heavy and stays waterlogged pretty easily. So with azaleas, I'm going to plant them high. They definitely like to dry out between waterings. I'm going to use a compost that will dry out. You know, it's not a heavy, it's not something, if you can hold it together and it stays as kind of a ball, that's probably something that's going to hold too much water. But if you can, it just breaks apart a little, you know, in your hand. That's a good compost to use for azaleas, and then pine bark soil conditioner, or nothing at all. But azaleas actually like a bit of a lean soil. Everything in that plant family tends to like leaner soil conditions. You know, where you know, not a lot of pushing them. They're very capable of growing in poor soils. Rhododendrons grow on the side of mountains in North Carolina. You would never believe they're just in a crevice of almost no soil whatsoever, and just do amazing in those conditions. And so we don't want to overdo it with organic material, and we definitely don't want to hold water in place, and that manure would do both of those things. If it were me, I'd pop them out of the ground, no big deal, plant them higher, and maybe just not even amend it at all, or if you can find some pine bark soil conditioner, mix that in 50-50 with the soil that you pull out of the hole. I got another question about Japanese maple having frost damage and would be fine. Absolutely. Japanese maple will just leaf right back out. Again, wait for it to fully leaf out, and then you may see that you need to clean up the dead branches, just the little tips of the branches. Somebody asked me about zone 6, growing crepe myrtles in zone 6, and I would do them as container plants. I'd buy dwarf crepe myrtles, grow them as container plants, and then that way you can protect them in the wintertime. But you do want them outside when they won't be frozen. And so, you know, when I say winter protect, I don't mean put them in a basement and lock them away or anything like that, or try to keep them awake through the winter. I want them cold, just don't have them outside where they can stay frozen for 24 hours straight. So when you're only gonna get in zone 6 a few weeks of the winter probably where you would have a situation where the plant wouldn't thaw out during the daytime. Okay, those are the times you're going to want it in a garage so that it can thaw out every day. But don't overprotect it, but don't underprotect it either. Just don't let it freeze solid for any length of time, but do keep it cold. And then I always get these comments about peony transplanting, and that, you know, everybody's heard you kill peonies by transplanting them. I did those 7 in that peony planting video over here, and there's 6 here. And so 6 out of 7 were fine. I think probably the one that didn't come up was one of the pre-packaged ones I had bought at Home Depot, but the 4 that I did from the divisions over here, no problem whatsoever. You do have to leave them up high, you know, when you transplant them. Don't plant them too deep. It's super easy to overwater them, especially when you've dug a new hole and you're digging in the soil. That's a space that can stay wetter. But keep in mind, every peony that you see was transplanted there from somewhere else in some other way, from a container, from a store, from a neighbor's division or something like that. So you won't kill peonies by transplanting them unless you overwater them or love them to death. So that's it for this week. That was a really good group of questions. I appreciate everybody taking part in this video. And again, you can ask questions down below. It will be 2 weeks before we come back around to question and answer. Again, thanks everybody for participating in the Subscriber Sunday video. I never knew when I started that. I think the first week I got like 4 photos, 2 years ago. And now there's probably going to be 5 or 6 minutes of photos next week. So again, thanks for participating in that. Do send photos, but like I say, the ones from today on, I will bump into the first Sunday in June is when you'll see them in the video. Thanks for watching.